very much, Jenny. I did my dutiful thing and turned off my mobile because how embarrassing it would be. So it's my pleasure to introduce this afternoon's session, and we have three excellent speakers. I haven't been with you through your session, but several people have said to me the speakers have been excellent, the sessions have been terrific, and I'm sure that this will be no exception. We have a fairly tight time frame, so perhaps I should get into the introductions. Our first speaker this afternoon is Bishop George Browning on my right here. Internationally, he's chair of the Anglican Communion Environment Network. He has spoken and written about the morality and theology of the human footprint and sustainability. He's an advisor to the Climate Institute and a strong proponent of the responsibility of Christians generally, and the churches in particular, in being in the forefront of environmental responsibility. He, of course, has recently retired as Bishop of Canberra Goulburn, and that will give him a lot more time, I hope and trust, to get more involved in environmental issues. So please welcome George Browning.
Russell and ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. It's a privilege and a responsibility to be speaking to you today. In some quarters it's customary to pay respects to the Indigenous people. This afternoon I'd like to pay respects to the late Professor Peter Cullen, who died yesterday, and whose funeral service is on Wednesday. Professor Cullen probably has made a greater contribution to the whole science of water in Australia than anybody else, which is one of the significant areas that relates to sustainability. You must be wondering why George Browning and Paul Collins are here at all, because surely we're part of the problem, not part of the solution, particularly the Catholics, because they almost, as an institution, are entirely responsible for population explosion. I was actually asked on another forum why I was there. I was speaking in Sydney at a conference on the environment for industrialists and business people, and the head of a mining company asked me why I was there in their company. And I said, well, the person that I work for provided all your resources. The three of us have an almost impossible task. Well, it is an impossible task, and that is to respond to the question, where do we go from here? Or what should we do? And maybe eat, drink and be merry, because tomorrow we die is maybe what we should do. But I would like to say, first of all, that where we go from here is utterly dependent upon your imagination. The human imagination and human ideas are greatly devalued, and within our society today, imagination isn't really honoured. Thank God children have enormous imagination, but unfortunately for many of them it is pushed out of them by the time they become adults. We never arrive at any place that we haven't imagined. Imagination is absolutely essential for the direction of life sustainability on the face of the planet. Having recently retired, I unfortunately have now received communication from the Retired Bishops Association, and one of their articles in their paper, which I've now asked them not to send to me again, is written by a retired bishop whose title for his talk was A View from the Grandstand. A pretty depressing article. Obviously, his imagination is that while he was a bishop, he was a real person, and now that he's no longer a bishop or no longer an active bishop, he is in the grandstand. And in my mind, I wrote a letter to him, but fortunately I haven't posted it, in which I said, for God's sake, you are probably for the first time in your life not in the grandstand. You are running the race of life itself. And you have a wonderful opportunity now, out of the pomposity of your position, to take a real place in the race of life and to contribute as a human being with the rest of us to the challenges that face common humanity. And I think that's my first position. So where we go from here is entirely dependent upon you, upon me, and upon every single human being on the face of this planet, and upon our imagination for the future. For myself, I imagine that I will live until I'm approximately 80. It's not a particularly ambitious imagination, because that's what Australians now imagine they're going to do. I now have a number of grandchildren. They're too young to put the question to them, but if they were asked, "What do you imagine?" I suspect that they would like to answer the same. But whether they actually can answer the same is a difficult matter. Every day when I wake up, more or less every day, but yeah, pretty well every day, I ask myself the question, George Victor Browning, what will you do today? For which Matthew and Samuel and Zachary and the other little ones will say in 50 years' time, "Good on you, Grandpa George. You had a voice and exercised it, you had influence and you used it." And I also ask myself the other question, what will I neglect to do today, or what opportunity will I pass up, for which they will say, "You silly old faggot, you know, you had a chance and you didn't use it. You had a voice and you didn't exercise it." So imagination is extremely important, and it's up to you to imagine the world in which you wish your children and grandchildren to live, and to exercise responsibility in order that that might become a possibility. Now, Jenny asked when I'm going to preach a sermon. Well, that's my stock in trade, but I'm not going to do that, but you'll get something of the background of my own story. I do not believe that we ever imagine in a vacuum. We imagine out of the meta story in which we have been nurtured. And one of the great tragedies of the modern era is that many people are unaware of the story that is theirs. So, our story, our common story, I'm going to be impertinent to suggest what it might be, is number one, that this world is a single house. That this world is a single house. I used to get infuriated by many things of the previous Prime Minister, I've forgotten his name, but enormous number of things infuriated me. One that infuriated me more than anything else, and that was he said, "I will always act in Australia's best interests," as if the interests of Australians are different from the interests of the rest of the world. That is not true. It is not true. The world is a single house. And that which is in the best interests of my sister, who is married to an Ethiopian in the Horn of Africa, and she lives in the Danakil Desert, the hottest place on earth, her interests and mine are the same. Sustainability, equity, and justice. And if I deliver out of those interests, then I deliver not just to her detriment, but also to my own. So the first part of the story, out of which I imagine, is that the world is a single house. That is not new. That has been the imagination of the majority of the world, at least from the monotheistic religions, for 3,000 years. But we have acted as if the world is not a single house. Secondly, we know that all the parts of the house live in a relationship of interdependence. No part of the house is dependent of any other part of the house, and yet we live as if they are. And we human beings have lived for some considerable time now in the Western economic system as if we can milk our particular part of the house without having an effect on the rest. And that is simply untrue. It is just not possible. This is not simply a religious thing. This is what science also teaches us. And so I imagine, first of all, out of the premise that the world is a single house. I imagine, secondly, that every part of the house is mutually interdependent. And with a guy called Wendell Berry, a novelist from the United States of America, I have become to imagine that within that house, the human activity is engaged in what he calls the big economy. But the big economy draws all its resources from the great economy. The great economy is the created order.